Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Business of Learning podcast. My guest today is Masha Tarasyuk, who is a leader at Codeacademy. Masha, thank you so much for being here today.
Of course, happy to be here.
Awesome, Masha. Tell me a little bit more about Codeacademy, what you guys are all about, and who you help.
Yeah, absolutely. So Codeacademy started over 10 years ago, and the goal was to help people to learn how to code, to develop themselves, and to build a better life for themselves and their family. And since then, we've really evolved. We started off teaching people how to code, but now it's a lot more than that because what tech skills mean today is very different than what they meant kind of 10 years ago. Also, something to note is that we started off and we had kind of the typical founder story of Zach, our founder, dropped out of college. He wanted to teach people how to code. And since then, as a company, we've also evolved a lot. So about 3 years ago, we were also bought by Skillsoft, which typically is focused on enterprise learning. And they really saw an opportunity in the way that Codecademy taught, the interactive platform, and that there could be a really nice benefits between us. And so they bought us about 3 years ago.
And when it comes to what you guys do, you just quickly mentioned that Skillsoft obviously focused on that enterprise side of things. Is that also a focus of yours, or is it just mostly on the B2C? How does that dynamic work within the business?
Great question. So Codecademy traditionally has focused on B2C. Really, the target audience has been, hey, I studied English in school, or I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I'm exploring is coding right for me, right? That's kind of the traditional where we started.
Mm-hmm.
That's evolved a good deal. We still primarily focus on B2C, but about a couple of years ago, even before we were acquired by Skillsoft, we started a B2B business because we saw that people used Codecademy for their own learning. Then they went into organizations and they said, hey, you have this training, or maybe you have nothing. Maybe it's internal training, maybe it's a different provider, but it kind of sucks. And I had this really fun experience learning to code in Codecademy. I'd love to bring that in. And so it was very organic where we actually developed an enterprise or a team's product. So usually used by smaller teams as opposed to kind of thousands upon thousands. And it could be your data team, your development team, your marketing team that's looking to upskill. And so we do have a team's offering. I manage both the go-to-market and product marketing for both. And that's been really exciting. That's been a shift more recently.
That's really, really awesome. And I would love to learn a little bit more about you and kind of your entire journey into becoming and standing where you are today.
Absolutely. I'll see if I can say it quickly as an elevator spiel.
Sure.
But I've been in the education space for over a decade now. And I started off in academic consulting. I majored in econ and I thought I wanted to go into finance. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And years ago, when I was still a college student, I remember I was doing a practice interview. And that summer, I had interned at a bank and I also taught English in Hong Kong. I was doing this mock interview, and this lady who worked at Lehman Bank, so that tells you how long ago this was. She goes, when you talk about teaching, your eyes light up. And when you talk about working in banking, that's not the same. And I spent a lot of time trying to make my eyes light up when I talk about banking and finance, but that just did not work out for me. So I started off in academic consulting, but I ended up joining Teach for America. I taught high school math for a couple of years in Brooklyn, and that was an amazing experience. I'm so glad that I did that. But I realized after 3 years, that's not what I didn't want to stay in the classroom. I didn't know what I wanted to do. So like many people who don't know what they want to do, I went back to school. So I went to get my MBA at Columbia. And there, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I had recommendations. I should check out ed tech. At that point, I thought ed tech is just a bunch of 20-year-olds who don't know what they want. Like, they don't know anything about education and are trying to sell these products to teachers who are just tired and who have problems outside of like getting new apps. Because I just remember my own experience as a teacher. I am very sorry, but I have my dog who is just scratching at my...
You're okay. You're okay. Let the dog in.
She's very demanding.
Okay.
This is Lucy.
Very cute.
Yes, she's 13 years old and incredibly demanding. So my long elevator spiel, which as I said, I'm very long-winded. So, that's kind of went to business school. They said, you should check out ed tech. I said, I don't know about this. And after a while, I explored the jobs and I realized I actually did drink the Kool-Aid. I realized this is a really fantastic space for me. And I have been at so many different ed tech companies. I worked at Kaplan, edX, Coursera, Chegg, 2U, and now I'm at Codeacademy. And it's funny because some of them are direct competitors, some of them are more kind of substitutes.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that overall, and you alluded to this before we started the conversation, yes, they're direct competitors, but at the same time, the volume of people that are not using any of these products and are not learning is so much greater than the market share of kind of stealing this,
Mm-hmm.
market share from one company or another. And so I think that my goal is, how do I figure out how to message the people who might not even think about this product right now? I think that
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of the idea.
Yeah.
And in terms of my overall experience, I focus primarily on understanding the audience in different ways. I
Mm-hmm.
work more on the strategy side. Now I'm part of the marketing team. But overall, it was, how do you understand market demand? How do you understand what users are interested in? And one of the things that I absolutely love about my role is that I get to work with so many different teams, and that fits my personality really well. So I somehow landed in like the ideal job for me, even
Mm-hmm.
though, trust me, I did not necessarily map this out. I did not start off and say, hey, this is exactly where my career should go.
Yeah. That's so interesting. And I wanted to dig a little bit deeper into, thank you for sharing that, by the way. That's a really great context. I want to dig a little bit deeper into the aspect of getting that message across to your prospect. So many companies that I've spoken with, they struggle with this dynamic of, how do I explain the ROI that my client will get once they invest in this ed tech, in this e-learning, whatever it may be. And sometimes I think the solution, like looking at it from an outside perspective, I'm like, the solution is so simple. But I wonder what your thought process is on how you try to do that for your customers and really make sure that they understand the value that they will get before they get that value.
Yeah, I think that that's a great point, because not only is it understanding the value that you get before that value, but it's also, you're buying the product before you fully get to experience it a lot of times,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you're buying a pair of shoes, you can try them on, you can walk in them, you can see this is exactly what I'm paying for. Education is different. If you think about your university experience, which is, can be hundreds of thousands of dollars, you are paying up front and you are given this brochure, maybe you visit the campus, maybe you don't, and you're spending a lot of money on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think at tech, some of the companies are a little bit different, but there are a couple of ways. I think one is understanding that you have different learners with different needs and different goals. And so
Mm-hmm.
how do you communicate to those goals? So they can be, if someone is learning for a new job, for a career change, being really explicit about, hey, this is how long it takes, but this is what you get at the end of it. So if
Mm-hmm.
you're starting from, say, a data analyst and you're looking for a data science job, this is actually the increase in salary that you can get. This is the ROI. We also want
Mm-hmm.
to be really explicit about, these are the skills that you get, and also really upfront about, this is the time commitment that's required. I think that sometimes it's really, especially being in marketing, you are worried about being upfront about how much effort something takes, because right, like, ideally people think, oh, I can take a course, and AI is really in demand right now. I can take a quick course, and in a couple of weeks, I can be an AI expert, an AI engineer, and
Yeah.
get all of these jobs. And I think that the reality is somewhere in between, right?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, skills will open the door for you. They will expand your earning potential, but there's also a commitment,
Mm-hmm.
because you have to actually have the skills that you're developing. So partially it's showing the ROI explicitly, it's showing the learning explicitly, but part of it is also, you have to motivate people, because you have to make it fun. You have to remind them of they're moving towards their goal, especially when their goal can be so far away, right?
Mm-hmm.
We know that it takes our learners sometimes months, sometimes years to get to their goal. And so how do you communicate that achievement? How do you encourage them?
Mm-hmm. Would you say that the transparency of that relationship and those conversations that you have with possible clients kind of just sparks that light bulb in their head of like, oh, like this is the thing that I want, and it's not as easy as just clicking a button and getting it. There is effort towards it, but the effort will be worth it, because ultimately, if I don't take any action right now, then I stay where I am. So do you think that
Yeah,
that
I
transparency
think
of like
that
telling them to work? Yeah.
I think that transparency and that motivation is really important, to say like, hey,
Hmm.
we want to understand where you want to get to. Here are the steps that we think make sense, right? So I think that
Mm-hmm.
that level of transparency is really important. I think
Yeah.
also just being really explicit about learner stories. One
Mm-hmm.
of the things that at Codeacademy we really lean into is sharing real learner stories,
Yeah.
right? And it's also my favorite part of every time we have our all hands meetings, we start with learner stories. And
Phenomenal.
I
Yeah.
think that's really core, right? How are we actually
Hmm.
impacting
Yeah.
the people that we're creating our product
Hmm.
for? And that's really motivational to other learners that are coming to the platform, right? Because you want to see that someone who has your experience, who looks like you, who maybe didn't have a tech background or had a very diverse background, can achieve the things that you're looking to achieve. I think that's really
Hmm.
important.
Yeah. That's the usual thing that comes to my head whenever there's always like the, "Hey, we're not sure how to navigate this." Is like case studies is the best thing that you could ever do for anything.
I think case studies, I do think that it can become a little bit crowded, right?
Mm.
And I think building trust, it's partially case studies, but it's also it's a lot of things. I think it's not just kind of one campaign and you get a win out of it.
Yeah, for sure. And I like the fact that you highlighted also showing that internally. I think that's so important because, especially, I'm not sure how you guys have, how internally you work with sales teams and things like that. But oftentimes, just having that bit of that reminder of like, this is the impact that you are having. This is the success that you, because of you, has happened last week, last month, and all these things. And it's kind of just like that reignition
Uh,
of.
yeah, absolutely. I'll say, yeah, I think the success, but also I actually, for a bit of time had the customer support team report to me as well. And
Mm,
so not only the success, but actually the problems that your learners are having is also incredibly useful to be connected to. And our customer support team is on Slack all the time and they message customer quotes, they message issues. And that channel has a lot of visibility. And I think that that's
mhm,
really important to constantly be connected to, hey, if we launched a feature or if we have a campaign, how is this impacting people? And
mhm,
that's one thing that I really appreciate about Codeacademy is that we are staying close to our learners. And a lot of people that I work with were also learners or are learners. And I think that's also great if you can use your own product.
yeah, for sure. It's kind of like giving yourself that, oh, this actually works, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, right. Like dog fooding, you have to do it.
Yeah. Is there a specific? This is like a bit of a left field question, but is there any like belief or, yeah, any belief that you have about just building a company or growing a company that you have that some people maybe disagree with you? Is there anything that you think that isn't really the ordinary way of quote unquote maybe doing things that you think maybe more efficient or yeah?
Um, I don't know if it's a point that people disagree with, but I think having a good idea is not enough.
Mm,
And I think that a lot of things have to coincide, right? Like the timing has to coincide. You have to have luck. You have to have a lot of things going for you. But I also think that there's a basis of you have to be solving a real problem where you should be able to think of people immediately
mm,
who would be excited by this. I think if you can't, and this is true for a company or a product or a feature that you're starting, if you
yeah.
can't think of who is the audience for this and you can't think of a real person, frankly, who would want to use this, I think that is a problem.
Yeah. And when for your customers, what's like the one or two main things that they do wrong or they just that holds them back from achieving the usual results that they want? If it's a job, if it's just learning something
Yeah.
new.
Um, I think that the truth in learning products, and it's kind of the dirty little secret, is a lot of people start and don't finish, right? And for a long time in kind of, especially for in MOOCs and before when people talk about ed tech, they talked about MOOCs a lot. There was this conversation around, well, a lot of people start and they don't finish. The completion rate is terrible. And I think that's part of the journey. A lot of times you start things and you don't finish and you start something else. And so I think just time is the main problem for most people because
Mm,
there's so many things that are demanding our time, both because they're just obligations that you have, as
mhm,
well as it's challenging to keep learning, right? It can be fun, but you get stuck. You can get demotivated if something is hard. And so just persevering and not quitting and finding the time for it, I think is the biggest challenge.
mhm. That's so interesting. It's often a conversation of like, yeah, if only we could do this, then
I think that it's a challenge for our learners, but it's also a challenge for us of how do we solve it, right? So that's why I went back to How do you show people that they're making progress, right? How do
Mm-hmm.
you, for a time, there was kind of a fashion of micro learning. And I think that's still
Mm.
the case, where how do you allow people to fit learning into their life, right? Whether
Mm-hmm.
it's how do you allow them to make more progress in a mobile experience so they don't have to be stuck at their computer?
Mm.
Or how do you allow them to make progress in 15-minute increments because maybe that's all they have in the morning before they need to go to work or take care of their kids or whatever it is, right? How do you make it flexible so that they can take a year to finish something, or maybe they're suddenly unemployed and they have time to sit and spend hours a day learning, right? So I think,
Mm.
how do you build in that flexibility? How do you build in more of a personalized experience, right? And I think
Mm.
personalization has been like a bit of a buzzword. Now I think we're closer to it, but
Yeah.
it's a problem for us as a product to solve. It's not
Mm.
just, as a learner, you just have to buckle down and do it, right? Like,
Yeah,
we
for
need to
sure.
work on it as
The
well.
facilitation of it as well is like
Yeah,
it's a two-way street. And
exactly.
with that being said, like what are some of the challenges that you guys had as you were, I know obviously the acquisition helps many things kind of just fall into place, but what are some of the challenges that maybe are things that you're always just kind of like something that always knocks on the door and you're like, ah, this thing again, and we have to try to fix this or sort this out.
So I think, I don't know if it's like always fixes, but I think two things. There were a lot of people at their computers during COVID who were looking to learn, right? And COVID actually
Hmm.
helped ed tech in a couple of
Yeah.
different ways. People were learning online more. Traditional education was going online more, so they were really looking for ed tech, and there was money being kind of brought into it for a variety of reasons,
Hmm.
including kind of COVID. And also, growth was cheaper. Eyeballs were
Mm.
cheaper, and so if you are looking back to the growth that a lot of companies had at that point, it's a question of how do you replicate that growth? How do you build on it when it was such a
Hmm.
unique period? Because I think there's always an expectation in markets that you're constantly growing, right? And
Yeah.
so, how do you address that? So I think that's one of just constantly thinking about how do you grow? How do you increase the market size? The
Hmm.
other thing, especially that we're thinking about at Codeacademy, is what does it mean to learn to code today? What does it mean to learn tech skills today? And how can we adapt quickly enough to meet the changing needs of the market? And
I
so I
think
think
that's
that that's, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
no, I think that's an interesting point as well because like how do the coding obviously growth is important. The company always wants it wants to keep growing, so that's always going to be a given. That's always going to be something that wants to be optimized, right? But it's interesting that you mentioned the how like how coding applies to whatever you do. And personally, I know nothing about coding. I know that you have to do like the little arrow and then write script and then close the arrow. That's kind of all I know about coding. And but I think it's important because I had a conversation with someone else and they also have a coding company and they were more so on the game development. Obviously, it kind of all ties in together. But anyways, so they had that company, and I asked the question about AI, how he sees the role of AI in this entire thing, and it's like, well, AI can do so many great things, but at the end of the day, there has to be someone that knows what's going on to be able to check everything over. So it's like there's such a buzzword around AI, and yes, it can help and it can speed up the process and it can develop websites and it can do all these things. But at the end of the day, if you really want to become someone who is able to perform at a higher level when it comes to coding and all these things, you have to still know your shit. And if you don't know, it's just like,
Yeah, I think you have to know your shit, but I think that there is, I don't believe in sticking my head in the sand and saying like the way that things were are the ways they're going to be. There is
mm,
very much a change in the market. There's a change in um, the job opportunities for new developers.
mm-hmm,
And that's the reality, especially in the US, right? If we look
mm-hmm,
at the tech job markets, there's a different opportunity than it was before, especially for people new to the field. Because what generative AI is doing in coding, it's not necessarily taking the jobs of your developers that are highly experienced,
mm-hmm,
right? It's making them potentially a lot more efficient. And whenever you increase efficiency in an organization, there's that balance of, all right, this person is more efficient. We can either squeeze more out of them or we can squeeze more out of them and potentially have fewer people working at the organization, right? Because that's how a
mm-hmm,
lot of companies are just created. And so the question is, um, how do you adapt to that world? Like, one, if you are employed and have tech skills, how do you adapt those tech skills, right? And
mm-hmm,
if you're looking for jobs in this changing market, what are the skills that you need to develop, and how do you, if you're looking to enter, kind of the tech space broadly, and before your entry point and your kind of golden ticket was learning to code and kind of the
Mm.
basic syntax, what does that mean today? And I think that that is different. And I
Mm.
think that's the reality of it is, but I
Yeah.
think that coding is still kind of the building block of a lot of it. You're not going to be a great developer if you don't understand the basics, right? But you have to understand a lot more than just basic syntax.
Yeah, I would. For me, it would never work.
So
Thank
you say
God I
it
never
would never
got it.
win. So I don't think everybody needs to be able to like write in Python, right? I did
Mhm.
take a Python course. I've taken a bunch of other courses, and it was in part just so that I can honestly better understand the people that I work with and interact with
Mhm.
engineers better and kind of understand like if I'm asking you to do something, how much of a pain in the butt is that?
Yeah.
And I think that if I were starting from scratch, the things that I would learn would just be a little bit different.
Mm. And that actually leads me perfectly into the question that I was going to ask you, which is
Oh no.
if you had, what do you wish you knew before you started with, and I'll just be specific and say with Codeacademy because it's a little bit more recent, but what's one thing or maybe two things that you wish you knew?
I don't know if there's something that I wish I knew before I started Codeacademy. I think that so I'll answer it more broadly of like what I wish I knew um when I was thinking about which career to go into.
Mm.
And I think I stressed out a lot about what does my 10-year look like? What does my 5-year look
Mm.
like? And I think that careers can be pretty long. I think that focusing on developing yourself and getting the most out of every experience is much more important than having this 10-year plan and then thinking I'm off track or
Mm.
I absolutely need to do XYZ to get there. I think it's a lot more about how do you become the person that you want to be as opposed to like in your professional setting as opposed to like, how do I get to XYZ? I think before I started, there have been so many changes at Codeacademy, and I think that so I don't even know if there's something that I could have known to prepare myself for it.
Mm.
But because I joined in when it was in the process of being acquired, so it wasn't even public knowledge then, and I kind of found out about that as I was interviewing.
Mhm.
And there have been just so many shifts. My team size has changed from like, you know,
Mhm.
4 people to 8 people to 3 people to one person to
Yeah.
just who I report to. So I don't even know if I could have prepared myself for this. I think just being ready for the ride.
Just buckle up.
Yeah.
Just buckle up. And I wonder now, obviously, it's Code Academy is a hugely successful company. And out of curiosity, what are some of the goals that the company has now? Oftentimes, a company's goal is let's grow to a certain size, get acquired, and then just kind of like do our thing and like let them do their thing now because they acquired it. What are some of the goals that you guys have?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think a couple of goals. One is to continue being at the forefront of tech education.
Hmm.
And so we're working hard to make sure that both from a marketing standpoint and content and product, we are evolving. And so we've come out with a lot of cool tools and features, obviously a lot of AI assistance being
Hmm.
brought in, as well as generative AI content. So just evolving from that standpoint.
Hmm.
And bringing in kind of a diverse learner base. The second is because we have been acquired by Skillsoft is how do we help build an ecosystem? And so if someone starts off, let's say they learn about Codecademy a lot of times, we have a great relationship with a lot of schools. And so they might take a Codecademy course when they are in 10th grade. And so they might have been exposed there. Maybe they're exposed in their university setting. How do we stay with them? How do we stay relevant when they're looking for their first job? How do we stay relevant maybe when they start their first job or when
Hmm.
they become a manager and they want to train their team? And then,
Hmm.
right, like I think that then we have a product for them. We have a product if they become the next executive and are looking to upskill their entire
Yeah.
organization. So that's really the goal is staying relevant in terms of what we're teaching and then staying
Hmm.
relevant for the life cycle of the learner as opposed to being a boot camp that they take for a couple of weeks, a couple of months, and then never connect with again.
What do you think could possibly get in the way of achieving those goals?
A lot of things.
Yeah.
I think it's hard to be at the forefront of tech learning, right? It's changing so rapidly.
Hmm.
And we're the core Codeacademy for consumer team is under 100 people, and um, we're reaching like I think our total learner base is something like 60 million learners at this point. And so there are a lot of things that we want to do. There are a lot of things that are on our roadmap.
Hmm.
And there are a lot of things that we're considering table stakes and just figuring out how do we get that done. So I think just making sure that we prioritize effectively and we are putting our bets in the right place.
Mm.
So I think that's one. And I think the second is just, I think the people want to learn a lot of times. Sometimes it's for their own benefit, but a lot of
Yeah.
times it is kind of because they want to get external validation. They want to be rewarded in their job because there's this promise of increased skills lead to more job opportunities or increased
Hmm.
salary. If we have an economy where that is not supported, I think that'll impact people's motivation to learn. And
Mm.
so I think that's the other kind of factor of what's happening in the marketplace, what's happening in the world, where we don't have as much control over that. But that's something that's definitely on my mind of just general market trends.
Is there a bigger challenge? And would you say you don't have to be specific about this, but do you think there's a bigger challenge over the B2B side of things just because of the structure that you guys are operating in, or the B2C? Obviously, B2C has been like kind of how it's been, but like, how do you see that dynamic and the difference between both of them?
I think for a lot of
And
the
then, sorry, just to
organizations,
clarify, in
yeah,
like a client acquisition perspective, as opposed to like an operation perspective.
I think for growth, right now a lot of organizations are looking to reskill their workforce because there is such a fear of being left behind
Hmm.
in the evolution of how organizations are using AI. And
Yeah.
so I think that there is a clear path to grow there. And you'll see a lot of organizations. So some of my former employers, so like, you know, Coursera and some of the competitors, Udemy, all of those in the past couple of years have shifted more to B2B, and you'll see a lot of growth there. And I
Yeah.
think that's because um, it is easier to see kind of the financial impact there, right? You kind of say,
Hmm.
okay, you upskill, and instead of hiring someone who costs this much, you can upskill your current employee base, or maybe there's a skill gap and you can't actually hire for this. So it's a little bit easier to make that case. In B2C, one of the challenges, and there's a grow in terms of user acquisition and also grow in terms of revenue. And one of the challenges is the perception that learning should be free. And a lot
Mm.
of learning is free. You see a lot of Codecademy has a free component to it. It's a freemium model. There's a lot of value they can get for free. But there is a paid aspect to
Hmm.
Codecademy as well and to many of our competitors. And so I think that one of the challenges is in B2C is really like, why should I pay to learn?
Mm.
And especially outside of the US. In the US, I think we're very we're very prone to kind of expecting to pay for education
Yeah.
sometimes because of how expensive universities are. But that's not the case everywhere, right? There are places where all education is free, and so
Yeah.
it's a little bit different.
Yeah, it's funny. I had a conversation with someone, or I don't know if I had a conversation when I saw someone, but they were from France and they were talking about education and the cost of all these things. And they're like, it's just everything's so expensive here. And it's like, well, I could get a full master's degree for free in France. And I was like, well, that's sounds like a dream in North America.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think a lot of times though, when people talk about education outside of the US, one of the things that's not mentioned is who it's accessible for.
Mm.
So, um, not everyone goes to university. It can be in some countries you're put into certain tracks fairly early on. And so if you're not on the university track, you're not on the university track, right?
Hmm.
So I think that there's a balance there, but yes,
Yeah,
the cost of education is is definitely a problem in the US. I know we're past time, but
it's all
I
good.
think
It's all
one of the things that I really enjoyed working on is at 2U, I worked on some low cost degrees. And that was really great to think about how do you make it so that it's financially viable for universities and at the same time it's attractive to students.
good. Mm.
And figuring out how to bring low cost education to a large scale is definitely one of the things that really excites me is like, how do you bring
Mm.
valuable education that has an impact and you're not asking people to put a huge down payment down for
Right.
this promise that it might pay off in the end and it might not.
Interesting. Would it be okay if I asked you one or two more questions?
Sure.
Okay, awesome. If you had a magic wand and you could just wave this wand, Masha, and it would solve just one thing within the business that would make hitting your goals or getting more clients or achieving more growth, whatever it may be, it would make that much easier. What would the one thing be that you solve?
If I could increase awareness, and I don't know if a magic wand can do that, but it's, there are some folks who of course I know Codeacademy, right? And they're in this bubble, but there's such a large audience that I think could benefit from Codeacademy, or even frankly, some of our competitors. They're not even aware of the opportunities that it provides. And so user acquisition is expensive, especially if it's for brand awareness, right? If you are just spending money for this audience that might not be ready to take your product for years, potentially, or certainly months. And so if I could wave a magic wand and have the budget to just spend on brand building and brand awareness, I think that would be that. Or if I could just get government sponsorship for...
Or like $1 billion in the bank all of a sudden.
Yes,
Right?
So I think that's probably what I would
Okay,
bet
awesome.
on. Yeah.
Great. And then the last thing, thank you for sharing that. The last thing that I wanted to ask is, I believe you might be familiar with Stephen Bartlett, who hosts the Diary of a CEO podcast, and he has a section where he asks people a question from the past guest, and I stole it from him because I think it's really a great section. So I'm going to ask you a question from my past guest.
Okay.
Which is, what is the number one thing that gave you outstanding results in 2024?
Outstanding results. That is a really challenging question. So it's challenging on two fronts. One, because I think outstanding is above expectations or forecast. And I don't know if there was something that was significantly above forecast, in part because we're pretty good at forecasting.
Okay.
but also because I have very high expectations. So thinking about that, I'm going to answer this maybe a little bit cheeky, but I loved seeing the growth of the people that I work with and in what they've been able to accomplish. And so because sometimes we have to work with a smaller team or getting things done that were outside of their specific roles, I think the things that have given me outstanding results where I've just been super impressed is really just the initiatives that the people that I work with have been able to carry out when I have released the reins. And
did you do anything specific to give them that incentive and kind of just push them forward to get that output?
I think that there are two things that I try to do, or a couple of things, but the main thing is provide enough context and enough coverage. So I tend to believe that if you are managing or if you're responsible for a project, and if the mistakes of the team are your mistakes, but the achievements of the team are the achievements of the team members, right? And then you kind of promote that. And so giving the coverage of if you make mistakes, it's okay. The second is just, I think for people to connect with the goal and be actually excited and motivated by the project, you have to allow them independence. You have to take some bets and say hey, I might not agree with this idea, but I would rather something be not 100% the way that I want it to be, but incorporate the ideas of others because I think it gets them more excited and it gets better outcomes, than have something that I think is more likely to work, but that feels like it's very top down.
Awesome. Masha, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you sharing your insights.
Absolutely. Hopefully you can cut my dog and my kid at the end just ran in.
It's okay. We leave it organic for everybody to see the real world. Where can people go if they want to learn more about Codeacademy and what you guys are all about?
Yeah, just go to codeacademy.com, explore. Also, if you have questions about kind of the ed tech space and if there's anything that I can do for folks kind of figuring out their career, please feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. I am not always great at following up, but that is because I just am managing and juggling a couple of different things, not because I don't want to. Yeah. So yeah, feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Masha, thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.